your Lordship's house have had such personal experience of the consequences of what happens when human rights are violated as the noble Baroness Lady Hellick, and it's always a privilege to participate in debates in which she is involved, and also to speak in a debate initiated by the noble Baroness Lady Ainley, which she introduced with her characteristic knowledge, but also showing how long-standing her commitment has been to both international affairs and to human rights. Lady Ainley said in her remarks that this 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is a watershed moment. Well, of course, it was also this weekend that 75 years ago the new United Nations promulgated the Convention on the Crime of Genocide. My Lords, my fifth private member's bill on Genocide Convention was given a first reading on Monday last, and I hope that this time the government will give it time to proceed. The Genocide Convention and the Universal Declaration are inextricably linked, but it was the UDHR that provided the benchmarks, the telltale signs that disrespect for human rights, especially of minorities, could morph so easily into atrocity crimes and into genocide. In framing the UDHR, Eleanor Roosevelt, Reni Kassan, Charles Malik and others, some notably from smaller and less powerful nations, were a determined group of enlightened people who drew on many cultures, beliefs and faiths. Pen-Chung Chang, the vice chairman of the drafting commission, was deeply influenced by traditional Confucian Chinese concepts of human dignity, saying the task was, to use his words, to subdue people with goodness. This led to the words, the spirit of brotherhood, being added to Article 1. The Chinese Communist Party might reflect on Chang's insistence that the UDHR has universal application, not least as China has ignored at least 11 of the 30 articles in the UDHR in relation to Hong Kong. The CCP is also accused of genocide in Xinjiang, and I refer to my non-financial interests in the register, while perversely, and Lady Faulkner touched on this earlier on, taking a place on the United Nations Commission on Human Rights, China's blocking of a UN debate on the High Commissioner for Human Rights report on the situation in Xinjiang is a disgrace. Now that the FCDO has accepted a decision by a German court that a genocide took place against the Yazidis in 2015, my Lords, does this mean it will now accept determinations made by other competent courts in the case of Uyghurs, for instance? In 1948, the principle of universality was agreed with no dissenting voices, although the Soviet bloc joined with Saudi Arabia and apartheid South Africa in abstaining. Although in today's world it is dangerous, with its dangerous axis of authoritarians and dictators, that consensus has been smashed to smithereens, the dictators, Xi, Putin, Kim, Khamenei and the rest, will not necessarily, my Lords, have the last word. The Universal Declaration has and can be a touchstone for the sort of grassroots movements that toppled totalitarianism in Eastern Europe, that saw off apartheid, emboldened the civil rights movement of Dr. Martin Luther King, and in much of the world replaced colonialism with independence. The UDHR also spurred religious leaders to reassess their place in a plural society, with, for instance, the historic Catholic promulgation of Dignitatis Humanae in 1965, the 2016 Islamic Marrakesh Declaration of more than 250 Muslim religious leaders, heads of states and scholars, and Indonesia's Nadul Datul Ulama. Today's Article 18 of the UDHR, about the right to believe, not to believe, or to change your belief, was framed, of course, against the backdrop of the Holocaust, and religious persecution is systematically honoured in the breach to this day, notwithstanding that declaration. Think, for instance, of the Uyghur Muslims, the Rohingya Muslims, Nigerian Christians, Iranian Baha'i, Falun Gong, Hazara and Yazidis, and other minorities. Or think of the denial of rights to Afghan girls and women, the rape and violation of women in Sudan and Tigray, touched on by the noble Baroness Lady Hellick, and the bleak denial of justice in so many places. Let me put some specific questions to which, following the debate, perhaps the noble Baroness Lady Swinburne can ensure receive answers. In the case of the Uyghurs, will we join with the French in trying to have the Security Council veto removed when recommendations for referral of atrocity crimes are laid before it? In the first instance, perhaps the UK should secure support in the General Assembly. 10 years ago, a commission of inquiry into human rights violations in North Korea found crimes against humanity, but fear of a Chinese or Russian veto has prevented a referral to the ICC. And meanwhile, in breach of a 1951 Refugee Convention, China forcibly repatriates hundreds of North Korean escapees. It incarcerates in jail Jian Zhang, the young woman journalist who asked the right questions about the origins of COVID-19, and holds in prison the British citizen Jimmy Lai and 1,200 pro-democracy prisoners in Hong Kong. My Lords, why hasn't the Foreign Secretary called for their release? Perhaps, my Lords, the FCDO could also tell us why in August it mysteriously removed from its website the listing of Darfur amongst the previous genocides. I've recently raised questions concerning Afghanistan, Tigray and Nigeria, and I'd be grateful if the Minister could ensure that they receive a reply. Cases like these demonstrates why the UDHR matters so much, but also why we need to breathe new life into it on behalf of those whose rights are violated.